start this discussion with Aprameya. Firstly, what's your take on the topic?
So I actually think that investors have done a little too much
Okay.
already. So it's not about what they could have done more, but maybe you know we kind of the kind of pace at which the companies were expected to grow uh, didn't match the kind of infrastructure or the kind of market that was there for most of the sectors that were invested in the last couple of years, right? So I feel that getting too involved in there are examples of getting too involved in strategies of companies and what to do and what not to do. Then putting in too much money into certain sectors where the fundamental problem hasn't been solved by the company. These are two key points: too much money too fast, and getting too involved when it's not growing as per what they had thought, right? Because the ground realities are very different.
It's been really unfortunate, and I think the investors could have done a lot to not let essentially what we've now seen, what's happening in the last 4 or 5 months fundamentally. And I think what was happening was there was a period of time where I think investors were pushing organizations to just get growth and nothing else. So everything that mattered at that point in time was grow at any cost. Was really one, the mantra that was getting driven, and that's what we were seeing from the outside. And in about a few years' time, the whole thing has just completely changed. And sitting outside, we can't figure out what has changed actually, because fundamentally, I think if businesses didn't have unit economics, and businesses didn't have fundamental stuff in them, and they weren't addressing what really customers needed, then to start with, they shouldn't have been in business at all. So right now, the whole thing is really, growth doesn't matter. So you can't just keep growing, but what matters is your bottom line. What matters is unit economics, and the whole thing has just shifted to to believing. And fundamentally, I think there should be a great balance as far as these two things are concerned, which is growth and unit economics. And that's what we've not seen. And I think the investor community could have done a lot in terms of playing this balanced role right from day one, which was 4 or 5 years ago. And I think that would have helped a hell of a lot.
Thanks, Bharti. What's your take from an investor's perspective on this?
I know if investors are the bad boys and girls these days. When they were writing the check, everybody was standing in line to take those checks, big ones, whether they were unit economics or not. I think just to go back on the topic of when the founders go through tough times, my first question is, how do you define tough times? Is it a macro issue or is it a micro issue? And I think that will then decide what kind of a role an investor plays or should play. And it gets harder to step out and look inside, and I think that's the role investor plays. So in my view, investors, I can't speak for all investors, but I think we've always supported our entrepreneurs through the good and the bad times in a very even keel manner, not gone sort of on the hard deep end either way. And I think a lot of investors do that. So I'm not sure that they have left entrepreneurs in a lurch while the times are tough.
Ganesh, as someone who straddles both the worlds, what's your take on this?
No, I think we are, all of us on the dais, I think, are being very, very nice and polite and diplomatic. Okay, right? So I think firstly, I don't think it does justice to the topic and all the time that all of us here are spending. Okay, right? Having said that, I don't think there are any holy cows here. It is not investor versus founder. I think we saw, I wouldn't say 2 years, but maybe a year and a half of period when there was a lot of stuff that was happening, which carried away everybody, investors, founders, entrepreneurs, and all that stuff. So I would say there have been, and the point number one. Point number two, I don't think it's correct to paint, like Bharti mentioned, all investors in one category, or just like it's not right to paint all entrepreneurs in one category, right? So that's point number one. Point number two, I genuinely think that the what we saw was a more like an aberration, and definitely there are enough cases of good, solid investors who have stood behind the company and have batted for the company and have supported them and led from the front like any entrepreneur or co-founder. As long as some cases gives a great return. For an entrepreneur, it is not like that. It's the life that is taken. Great example is when people talk about the food in your breakfast table, right? The hen that gave the egg has also contributed to your breakfast. So is the baker. The difference is, okay, right? One gave the life to be on your breakfast table, okay, right? The other one just gave the egg to be there. It lives to survive the other day. I think that is where the challenge comes in. But if you ask me to give a percentage, I think 75% of the time, I think investors that I have seen in India and the Indian startup ecosystem have done all that they could do to do this. And they are also suffering. They are also hurting. They are not enjoying. There is no winner here. But balance 25%, lot to be different.
Okay. So, Hari, how do you make sure the alignment between the investors and founders is right? If that's of an issue,
Yeah,
how do you work?
this is a favorite piece which I love talking about, is this whole alignment of investors. And internally we call it when we work with investors, we tell ourselves that there is a typical honeymoon period when things are going well, and that's the term that we use internally. And as Ganesh rightly put it, the test of the investor is really what happens when, and every business will go through the cycle. Every business will go through a cycle when times will become a little difficult. Strategy doesn't work, things don't work. You need to pivot. You need to do different things to move along. And I think it's critical that the investor plays a very, very strong role while that is happening. And of course, I've got enough examples with my own life and our own journey where we really got pained, in our earlier avatar, when some of those things didn't happen, and when things weren't working out for whatever reason. We started an online business in '99. I don't think anything existed at that point in time for us to have started an online business, but there was so much hype and so much talk about starting it, so we started it. There wasn't an ecosystem available. And that's a time when companies like that go through a difficult phase, and investors could have played a great role in terms of making sure that companies go past it. Now, coming back to your question, Madhav, is our big mantra and a big belief is that I think the investor must stay clued into your business as much as you can. And Ganesh will vouch this. Our board meetings, when we first started, for the first 1.5 years, were twice a month. Right? It's not easy to kind of every 15 days, sit in front of the board, create an update. It's just a 15-day update. But, this is a learning that we got from our previous time. And, is 3 months is a hell of a lot of time, because investors are involved in multiple businesses. And I'm not saying they're not clued in. They are clued in. They understand what's going on in the market. But just to feel the pulse of the business, we really felt that 3 months is just too long, because there's so much happening every week, every 10 days in the business, that it's absolutely critical for the investor to stay clued in. So we used to do our meetings with all investors, right, twice a month. So every 15 days we used to meet. It then moved to once a month, and after 4.5 years, it still remains once a month. We meet as a board every month, and everyone participates, and that really brings the investors, all our investors, up to speed, a lot more often, with a lot more periodicity than what 3 months does. Because in 3 months, lots has gone by. So it just takes the initial few hours just to get them to catch up with what's going on, and you find the meeting is over, right? Whereas meeting more often is one of the things that we feel that we've engaged well, and that's why this journey has been very, very good. And that's been one of the biggest reasons why it's been good, is that we've just met more often and kept ourselves updated more often.
Okay, so that was one of your learnings from the earlier.
Entrepreneur will go crazy, okay, right? So let's keep angel investor out of it, okay, right? That's a, from an investor perspective, the institutional investor is betting on a particular sector, particular plan, particular team, okay, right? And entrepreneur obviously is more closer to the ground, knows it. The extent of involvement would vary depending on the stage of the company, would also vary depending on what the maturity of the team is and maturity of the business model is. In some cases, we have seen where we have co-created, in spite of our having experience, we have co-created the business with the investor. I mean, I can actually give an example. Take HouseJoy, for example. It's a horizontal for home services, okay, right? Across all home services. Matrix Partners and we, when we came together, we said, like Amazon or like product, horizontal for product e-commerce, horizontal e-commerce for services is a big area. So we came together at that time, we actually co-created that particular business. So is Matrix Partners involved in the business? They are very deeply involved in the business. But that was the expectation because that we created. On the other hand, if you take, for example, Big Basket, okay, right? When we went to Ascent Capital, we were clear about the model, okay, right? It's the Fairmont team that had already done that before. We had done a small roll-up of a company called Shop As You Like, and it is a founder called Abhinay Chaudhary. So there, the evolution is very different. Both were Series A, by the way. Both were almost the same amount of money. Big Basket is slightly later. So I think there is a variance. But having said all that, investor trying to run the business can be very dangerous unless it is a way to solve a problem. There is a crisis, there is a problem, the entrepreneur is left, you have to change the CEO, you have to fully pivot and all that stuff. We have had this. In my own experience of running companies, we have had situations where the board had been deeply involved, but those have been cases where we have involved the board and the investor deeply because we are going through a pivot or a major aspect. Otherwise, typically they would, it's a disaster if you want them to come and run the company. Again, I don't want to name housing.com or other examples, okay, right? But I guess yeah, okay, right? But I agree.
But Aprameya, talking about investors, do you think there are enough investors who have operational capabilities to come into the company and help you run it, or if there's, let's say, a function, let's say your CFO leaves, and are there enough investors in India that one of them could come in and help you fill the CFO function or a CEO function in your company?
We've never had governance issues, and I think that's sort of very hygiene factor for us. The governance standards have to be a very high level for us to make an investment. And I think if there are a lot of people who are siphoning off money or have very poor governance standards, it is going to impact the industry. It is going to make people a little more wary of making investments. It's going to make people pause and and look at more carefully, and I guess do a lot more greater diligence. Greater diligence means a lot more time. So in the end, the entrepreneur suffers because the money into the bank takes longer to get to. But we've been very fortunate. We haven't really faced issues there.
So how did you deal with that governance issue in one portfolio company?
We called back our capital. Fortunately, the money hadn't been sent. Having said that, even though there were poor governance standards, but when we had to call back our capital, the team did not put up any fight. I mean, they were very happy, willing to return back the capital. I think it was more an issue of they didn't understand that those are poor governance standards as opposed to actually indulging in something that was unsavory.
Hari, what's your take on this?
On governance,
Yeah.
obviously, I think this is something that investors would be very keen to have a very clean company that they'll invest in, and I'm not too sure there are too many of these. Right now there are a few here and there, and unfortunately the media makes sure that it's all over the place more than what it should be. But I'm sorry to say this, but I don't think it's really something that we need to worry about today. That there are these few cases that that are there where there has been poor governance or some kind of fraudulent stuff going on there, but it's not too much, because I think there's enough diligence that goes into the whole process, and diligence starts with the people behind it. Diligence starts with making sure you've done enough reference checks. Diligence starts with going through papers, of course, except for when the company starts and when you put the money initially, there isn't any numbers that you can do it. But I think there's enough diligence that VCs and venture capitalists put into this whole system, and I find it hard to believe that there'll be too much of it will go wrong, and it doesn't actually.